once a long time ago, I went to a Wiccan ceremony. Yes, a religious ceremony, Wiccan ceremony. And at this ceremony, we all stood in a circle and someone created a ball of energy, right? So they, focused on their hands and they created psychically this ball of energy. And then people would take this ball of energy and they would pass it from one person to the next and around and around and around it went, right? And when somebody would get this ball, they would look at it and they would say, "Oh, it's so warm. The colors are it's so beautiful. It shows me the meaning of things in my life," right? And then they would move it on to the next person. And everyone in this circle would have an epiphany about this ball of energy, right? Well, it finally came to me, and so I reached out my hands and I thought to myself, this is going to be it. I'm going to have, an experience that transcends this mortal plane. I'm going to feel something that I've never felt before. Well, the lady handed me the ball of energy, and I looked at her, and she said, "You've got it. You have it." And then I looked again at my hands. Sadly, I didn't have it. Obviously, this was a mental construct of everyone, and they wanted to believe, and maybe they really did believe, right? Maybe they, in their head, they have convinced themselves that it was there. But empirically, like in the real world, there was obviously no ball of energy for me to accept. Of course, at that point, I was like, I'm not getting it here. Pass it on to the next person, and on it went, and things were good for everyone. Well, the story, the reason I tell you is because, I can see a slight parallel between this and the hi-fi industry, or at least a small segment of it. And I'm talking about cables, right? Now, cables are a divisive topic, and I'm not here to be any more divisive than anyone has been in the past, but I did want to just talk about this a little bit and kind of throw out my thoughts on the subject, right? And in my head, there are kind of like four different kinds of cables. You got power cables, you've got interconnects, which are like XLRs and RCAs. You've got speaker wire, and then you've got digital cables, and these are things like digital, right? Cables to carry things that are encoded digitally. And of course, yes, people are like, no, it's not really digital, it's analog. Yes, of course, there's some kind of wave in there, but it's encoded digitally, right? And it reads the peaks and the troughs. And those are like USB cables and optical cables and those kinds of things, right? So it's not really carrying music, it's carrying a whole bunch of these things that a computer can translate into music and then turn into an analog signal that will eventually hit that speaker cable, right? At some point. But those are four kinds of cables. And there are many people out there that will say, without a doubt, 100%, when I listen, I can tell a difference between this cable, this cable, this cable, and this cable. And of course, I listen to this cable, this cable, this cable, and this cable, and they sound absolutely identical, right? And they're like, no, listen, you can hear the difference, the timbre quality, just the sound, like just listen to the attack of that thing, and then the resonance of the cymbal. And I'm like, I'm listening to all those things. It's the same. Not too long ago, I went to this hi-fi shop and they were doing a cable demonstration, right? And, there was the people up front with the speakers and they had their different sets of cables, and it was 3 or 4 different sets of cables. And we were all in the audience, typical audiophile group. I think they were playing Diana Krall or something. If you've been to a hi-fi show, you know what they play at the hi-fi shows. Anyway, so they put their first set on and they're like, okay, this is our least expensive set of cables. And, they're not very good. And, they don't do very much. And, they're not fully resolving and all this kind of stuff. And then they put in their second set. And they said, okay, you'll notice these differences, blah, 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 blah. And somebody said, well, was there a price difference? And they're like, yeah, this is anyway, they talked about it for a while, and they talked about how they, aligned the stuff or whatever in the cables. And, they play the music again, and the people in the crowd, they kind of looked at each other. There was one guy who's like, oh my God, it sounds so much better. And a couple of people around him were like, okay. And then there's this one dude who's like, sounds the same to me. And then, and then the sales people were like, well, you have to listen critically to be able to hear the difference, but it's there. And, that one guy was like, it's totally there. And me, I'm it's absolutely the same thing, right? No difference. And then they put in the third set of cables, more the same. And then they put in that last set and they're like, it's $15,000 a meter or whatever. And you're like, right? And then, the one guy, he was like, "Oh my God, this is the best ever. I have to have them." All right. So my point to all of this is whether it's speaker wire, your interconnects, digital cables, or power cables, from my point of view, it's never been demonstrated to me that a cable can make things better. Now, people will quickly raise their hand and say, "Well, I used an XLR cable one time and there was a buzz about." Okay, yes, bad things can happen when cables aren't shielded correctly and you run them next to power wires and you get some bleed over, that kind of. Yeah, a bad cable can mess stuff up, but that's not a function of the cable somehow magically changing the sound. That is simply a function of the cable being a piece of crap, right? And it's picking up electromagnetic signals and that kind of stuff, right? And you can get hum, right? Just like this microphone, this cable is a piece of crap. And I had it running beside a power cable. And in one of my videos, you heard in the background, "Oh," and that was just freaking bad cable, right? So I had to take the cable and move it away from the power. And then magically, it's okay again. But see, that's not a cable making things better. That's just an example of a crappy cable that can make things worse. And you'll see this in HDMI, right? So if there's something wrong with the cable, the screen will do weird stuff or whatever. But if it makes that connection, there's no HDMI cable that will make things magically more beautiful, the colors more vibrant, nor will, at least in my experience, any kind of speaker cable or power cable even increase the performance of the. Maybe not say increase performance, but make your experience better. Not in the real world. Now, subjectively and in people's perceived reality, that's where all of the magic happens. And I do believe that for many people is absolutely real. So, does my point of view that these cables really aren't making things better make a difference for the folks that cables do make things better for? Because there are people that raise their hand and swear, and I'm not talking about the people that are selling the cables, because people selling the cables will raise their hand and swear because that's their job and they want to make money because they like to eat and have houses and apartments and cars and clothes and heat and internet, all this, right? They need to sell the cables, right? So it's going to be better one way or another. This isn't a discussion of ethics, but there's a whole discussion of ethics that could be had. But there are people that, they're like, "I listened to this." It's like that one guy from the story before, right? He's like, "It's so much better." That in their world, in their experience, what it's like to them, it's better. It got better. They heard a difference, and it was different and somehow, and it made their experience better. Now, the question is, can both of these things be valid at the same time? And my take on that is yes. It's these can be valid at the same time. I can listen to a pair of cables and know, and the real world support me because this is how it is, that there's no difference in the sound, right? It's the same. But person B over here can be like, "Oh, this cable is so much better and it sounds best when I play it with jazz," and blah, 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 and that kind of stuff. And that's fine. That for them is absolutely true and it's okay. And these two things can coexist, right? Because our reality, as we were taught by the Matrix, is what we perceive. It doesn't necessarily mean what's really going on, because, another parallel is like with our eyes, we can see visible light, but we can't see ultraviolet or infrared. If we could, we'd see all this other stuff that's going on that we just don't perceive right now. Does it mean it's not there? No, it's really there, but we just can't perceive it. So I guess that's not really exactly right, because for the people that are experiencing something different, it's all in their head. But yeah, I guess it comes down to what is your take on reality. And if you really want cables to make a difference, they likely will, and there's nothing wrong with that. But just know that there'll be people on the other side of the coin that say, "Oh, cables don't make a difference." And that's okay too, right? For folks in my position, just don't buy them, right? And it's okay to raise your hand and say, "Oh, it doesn't make a difference." And then we can debate back and forth. And then for the folks on the other side that it does make a difference for, that's fine, buy them, but don't be taken advantage of. Don't spend $15,000 on a meter of cable. That, my friend, is moving into some kind of other kind of discussion that we need to have. I guess where I come down ultimately is no, I don't think any of these cables make things better. Cables can absolutely make things worse. 100%. I've experienced it myself. Cables can make things suck really bad. But, once the cable's good enough, it's good enough. But I do like jewelry. And I think cables add to the experience just by the visuals. Now, I would never get those big, fat, thick ones that look like snakes slithering around your house. But I do like a nice set of cables that look really good, that I can trust are built to a good standard so that I don't have to worry about them being substandard and causing problems. I think that's great. And you can buy them in all kinds of spectrums of cost. You can buy a cable XLR that's this long, $10, or this long and it's $200. And I think all that's fine. Now, if it's this long and it costs $15,000, there's something wrong there, right? When you talk about that one. But I think the cables are okay. That's where I come down. I love cables. I love pretty cables, and I love cables that are built well and do their job specifically. All right, do it specifically and do it quite well, right? No issues. Well, I guess like Forrest Gump, that's all I've got to say about that. I'm very curious what your take is on cables, because everybody's got a take, and like I said, this is divisive. And I'm curious, do you take issue with me saying that cables really don't make a difference as long as they're good enough? Do you believe that HDMI cables will make your television picture better somehow, right? Just compared to a cable that does its job, this cable can do the job better somehow and make the colors better. I'm curious what you think about that. And then power cables. I'm curious about that one a lot as well, because you get into things like sockets in the wall and that kind of stuff. Do you think it makes things better? Have you experienced that before? I'd be really curious to hear your comments down below. And then to all your cable manufacturers out there, all you folks, I want to know what you think about it too. What is your thought process? How do you justify different levels of cables? And are you building cables that you feel change the sound in some way? And if so, why would you build the worst cables as opposed to just building a really good cable? Do you want people to, I don't know. So everybody out there, want to hear your opinions. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next video.